Well, I'm thinking about changing my YouTube channel to things you gotta fix every day. Now I done went and done it. My lathe here has suddenly stopped turning. You hear this motor. Got nothing. Hear that humming? I'm hoping that's a switch. And in this lathe, this is the handle. Turns it on and off. This rod is connected to a switch in this here box. I've changed it once before. And I'm going to see if that's it again. I suppose the first thing a smart fellow ought to do is turn off the power at the circuit breaker. I'll tell you the reason I'm starting here is because a switch would be the cheapest thing. I would like for it to be the cheapest thing. I don't want to get into the motor. I got the 4 screws out right here, but what you know what the hell of it is that this rod has got to come out, which means the end has got to come off. All right, now the bracketry is loose on the end of these rods. I should be able to get this right out now. All right. Whoa, camera. These 4 screws here are holding the switch in. And I think we're going to take them apart because my wires inside this box are fairly short. And I certainly don't want to be trying to force that all apart. All right, I've got the switch loose from the mounting plate. And my next step is going to be take these wires loose. And at this point right here, highly recommend that you take notes. L1 to red, L2 black, T1, whatever wire that is, I can't get a good look at it right now. And take a picture or two. Pictures are always great for putting stuff back together. Just for my own satisfaction, I decided to take this switch apart. And what I've found is I've got this contact here burnt out. And over here, this contact here is fused. And in taking it apart, I've lost a spring. I have mentioned before I'm a glutton for punishment. I knew when I took this apart I wasn't going to get it back together. But now I've confirmed that the switch is definitely bad, which does make me feel better. Now guys, I thought this was going to be a pretty simple project. So I called the lathe manufacturer, and the lathe is old enough that they don't make parts for it anymore. And so what I was looking for was a reversing drum switch, which is a forward, off, reverse. And I came up with some different options. This one was off of Amazon, and it is what I need, except it's a little big for my application. There's the switch box. It could fit, but the big problem I had with this one was this actuator right here. What's on the levers with the lathe has a square, and this is not square. So I really didn't care for that too much. The other problem with this one, when I got to looking at it, is it's really underrated for the amperage. So I didn't want to go with that. And a friend of mine had a regular reverse off forward switch. This one would work. The problem is the switch that came out of the lathe basically has 12 terminals, and this one only has 6. And I did a lot of research. In order to make this one work, I'd have to pull the wiring out of the lathe and rewire the lathe from the power input to the motor. And then this one was not going to work with the actuator switch on the lathe. Yeah, see, that won't go in there. And I don't know, maybe it's a defect on my part, but I really like things to work the way they did from the factory. So, by a stroke of luck, I got out this operator's manual, and in it, my uncle, who I got this lathe from, had apparently replaced this switch before and had the good foresight to put the part number and the box in this manual, which made it real easy. I called this company here, MSC Industrial Supply. They contacted the switch manufacturer, and they got me the switch. And here it is. It has the right end on it. It has the right end on it. It fits into the box. And I should be able to go back to the pictures I took and plug the wires in and be golden. This is a 17 amp switch. I would have liked a little heavier switch. They said they don't have a heavier switch, so we're going to make do with this switch here. This is the one that's been in the lathe since my uncle had it. I don't know how many years this switch has lasted. If for some reason this switch fails again in the future, I will probably go back to this switch and just rewire the lathe for the standard industrial switch. All right, it can be done. I'm not an electrical genius. This is the wiring diagram that I worked out, and it's a matter of switching these two wires here to make this run forward or reverse. In order to make this one, 2 of these wires have to run straight through, and then these other wires have got to switch. Like I said, I'm not an electrical guy. I'm just making do with the limited knowledge I got, which is why I'm going back to the original equipment, because this is easier. It's basically plug and play. You unplug the old switch, plug the new one in, you're good, right? Not too much fussing around. Now I am finding out, trying to put this plate back on it, that there's a shoulder on this actuator that's not letting the plate fit down flush. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and drill the center of this out to let this shoulder come through it. Alright, so here we are back to machine. Got all the parts cleaned up. I did have to modify the holes in this plate, mounting plate, a little bit, because this switch is just a little bit different than the one that was in there previously. And I decided to make one other change. These 2 wires here were put together with a screw and a nut, and that worked, but I'm not a big fan of that, so I'm going to use these spade connectors with the insulators on there, put those together. I just like it better. It's unnecessary to change it. It's worked the way it was. Just not a big fan of putting screws together like that. putting wires together with nuts and screws. So, putting it back together is going to be the same as taking it apart, just reverse order. I did take pictures of it coming apart so I know which wires go to which terminals. And I'll turn the camera back on when I get her back together. Well, I feel like there was something. According to my pictures I took, and I recommend if you do this yourself, anything you do yourself, especially take pictures, lots of pictures when you take it apart, so when you put it back together you know what order. Well, the picture I had, the order of wires was yellow, white, red. But when I put this together and turned the switch on, the motor ran backwards. Could have lived with that, but I'm not that kind of guy. I want the motor to run forwards when I want it to go when the switch says forward. So switching these two wires back here changed the direction of the motor. And the only other thing I'll tell you about this thing here is, if I ever take this back apart, I'm going to cut these wires and lengthen these wires out because they're way too short for this bigger switch. I got just enough wire to get to the connector, and not a smidge more. All right, so that's going to cram back in there like that. We're going to bring this plate up here back on like that. I'll come back to this camera when she's together. All right, there's my control rod, and it goes over the switch. There's something that's keeping it from seating in there. Now this is the time when you don't want to do the old redneck trick and grab a hammer. Alright. There's something inside of that. Oh, what was that? That appears to be a spacer or some kind of a sizer. I bet the switch I took out of this had a smaller control shaft on it. Well, let's see if it goes together now. Look at that. Friends, when you're putting stuff back together, don't grab hammers. And I know guys who would have grabbed a hammer and hammered that in there. You don't want to break a $100 switch that you spent 3 weeks trying to find in here. All right. Now I got to put the tail back together, and we'll see if it runs just right. All right. Shafts are back in the tail. Switch is all back together. Control handle works like I want it to. Everything's all right again. So I think I'll spend the rest of my night putting away tools and maybe clean this lathe up. You know what? I haven't cleaned this thing in a good long time. I bet she'd run better if she was clean. All right, don't be afraid to do things yourself. Take lots of pictures. If I haven't said it before, take lots of pictures when you take things apart so you know how to put them back together. And don't be afraid to try.